Joining me is Michael Cohen, the former personal attorney to Donald Trump. He hosts the podcast Mea Culpa with Michael Cohen and Political Beatdown. He's also the host of the new YouTube program, The Michael Cohen Show. Michael, good to see you. Thank you for being with us. You came with receipts about the number of groups, with the exception of one or two, that Donald Trump has insulted in his tenure in politics. Yeah,
the only two that I can think of are white supremacists as well as evangelical group. Short of that, there is not a single group in America, whether it's veterans, firefighters, police officers, blacks, Jews, Mexicans. I actually brought it. It's the first time being on any show that I've actually brought notes with me. But women, Asian Americans, Latinos, I mean, we can go on here, Muslims, disabled people, Native Americans, obviously the Haitian immigrants, African nations, handicapped journalists, Puerto Ricans, name it.
Yeah.
And so the question that I would sort of pose is, why are there any members of these communities that would possibly vote for him or think that he is the right person for the job of the presidency of the United States of America again?
Well, is it because he morphs some of these things, right? So he talks about the hordes of immigrants and the vermin that he calls them, which is a terrible example because this has been used around the world with Hitler, with Rwanda, where you call people something
to dehumanize
them, right? But then he says they're taking 100%, 107% of the jobs are being taken by black people or from Hispanic people or whatever the case.
Right, because his mathematics is just absolutely spectacular.
But he's pitting people against each other. So when you say, why would any of these people support him, it's because it's all by design to make somebody blame someone else.
Absolutely. I mean, look, let me just ask you this. Name one of the groups, and I will give you specifics. This is not me making it up. This is what he said before the American people about specific groups. I mean, just pick any one.
Well, we played one thing where he said if anybody who's Jewish would vote for Kamala Harris, they'd need to have their head examined. That's not the first or even the worst thing he said about Jews.
No, it's not. But his comments were. One of Trump's most egregious remarks came in 2019 when he told American Jewish voters, if you vote for a Democrat, you're being very disloyal to Jewish people and very disloyal to Israel. So this, of course, insinuates that American Jews have dual loyalty, which is a long-standing anti-Semitic trope. But then he also once said that the only kind of people I want counting my money are short guys that wear yarmulkes, reinforcing, obviously, the stereotype about Jews and money. I mean, let's not forget, as well, about his refusal to denounce people like David Duke or his comments regarding Charlottesville, when he turned around and he claimed that there were good people on both sides, referring to the white supremacists marching with the tiki torches, saying Jews will not replace us.
Now, Kamala Harris is, generally speaking, letting Donald Trump dig his own grave here. She doesn't tend to lean into this. But your point is a valid one. For people who I don't know, they're not following the news or whatever it is, and they think he's better on inflation or he's better for this or he's better for that. How do you message this idea? How do you explain to people that you got a list there? I don't know, you get 20 different points there of just insults that he's made to different ethnic, religious, or different groups.
By speaking out, by having people like yourself invite people like me to this show to speak as an American, regardless of whether it's being Jewish, white, black, Muslim, Christian, makes no difference. He has insulted every single group. And the only way to combat Donald Trump's foolishness is to just keep talking about it, keep bringing up specifics. And there's a whole group of MAGA that no matter what specifics you bring up to them, they ignore it. They do not care. They're all in for him. Why? Because they fall into the same belief system as Donald. How many times have you heard Ali Me turn around and say he's racist, he's sexist, he's misogynistic?
Well, you pointed out 2017 when the hurricane swept through the Caribbean and we took a number of people in, particularly from Haiti, on humanitarian grounds.
Correct. And what did he say? He said, why are we taking these AIDS-infested immigrants into our country when there are people from Norway who are looking to come here? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand what he's saying here.
Right.
They look like him. as opposed to being black.
Right.
What information, what empirical data does Donald Trump have that would suggest that everyone in Haiti has AIDS? Imagine again what you're doing, to your point before. He is pitting one group of people against another. And that's all that he's doing. It's race baiting.
On one hand, and Kamala Harris brought this up in the debate, that obviously he's been at this for some time, particularly with the Central Park Five and the things that he and his father were accused of doing in terms of renting properties. But do you think there's been a further decline, or do you think this is fully orchestrated because he thinks he might lose the election, that this is what he's got left? He's got, this is a technique he knows, and history has proved around the world that this kind of stuff that he does work.
Well, this is all that he has left. I mean, the whole notion of I have a concept of a policy. You know what that stands for? It means I have nothing. And what he knows is one thing. When he loses, accountability is at his doorstep. I want to just bring to your attention, like Judge Juan Merchan set sentencing in the Manhattan District Attorney criminal 34-count case that I was key witness in the day before Thanksgiving. I just want you to think about that for a quick second on what the tables around this country, the conversation, are going to look like.
Right. We're going to take a break because I want to talk about what Donald Trump is setting the table for by having these conversations about immigrants and the things that they're doing. Michael Cohen's back with me. Michael, let's just talk about this. Talking about the people eating pets is actually not unrelated to this conversation that's holding up the government funding, which might result in a government shutdown because there's a bill to make it illegal to vote if you're a non-citizen. Alert, it's already illegal to vote if you're a non-citizen, but it feels like we're laying the groundwork for the big lie 2.0. If Donald Trump loses, it's going to be about the fact that immigrants, Haitian immigrants, whatever kind of immigrants, illegally voted in the election, and that's why Democrats got more votes.
Again, it goes right to his overinflated and his fragile ego. He cannot lose. Now, how can he lose to a woman? How could he lose to a black woman? He needs to come up with an excuse in advance, knowing he's going to lose the election. He needs the big lie number 2 in order to keep the grift going. That's all this is about.
Let's talk about sane washing. I started my conversation with this. A little over a week ago, he gave a speech at the Economic Club of New York full of economists, journalists, business people, economic journalists, and he gave a nonsensical answer to a very simple question about child care. What was that about? I would have thought he would have raised his game. And then you have reporters who were trying to, explain what he actually meant to say. There's no need to explain what Donald Trump has to say. He can do it himself.
And he did do it himself, and he demonstrated his lack of understanding
of child care and tariffs.
Of both, correct. Yeah. The reason, and again, I saw this, so I'm drawing from my past experiences in 2015, 2016, during that election. Donald Trump is generally a lazy guy. And people say, well, what do you mean? I see him going from rally to rally. Sure, he gets onto his own aircraft. He goes into the back. He goes to sleep. He wakes up. He gets there, brushes his hair, puts a little hairspray on, and off to the rally he goes where people are cheering for him. Right. He loves the adulation. But he's lazy in the fact he doesn't read and he won't prepare. It's why Kamala Harris destroyed him in this debate. It's the same thing as it relates to this economic club conversation that they had. He didn't prepare for it at all.
But you should have, because it was obvious that questions like that would come.
Did you see the faces of the economists that were there on that panel looking at him saying, seriously? What the hell are you talking about? Right. We asked a very straightforward question, and you got some rambling nonsense, whereas from the movie Young Frankenstein years ago, it's the nonsensical rantings of a lunatic mind.
Right.
And that's what it was.
But it is on us to some degree to make sure that this sane washing doesn't happen and to call it out when it happens, that you can't just do this. You can't treat it as acceptable. You can't say when he's talking about sharks and getting electrocuted that there's some reasonable connection between sharks and getting electrocuted. It's just his nonsense.
Sane washing is extremely dangerous, but thank God for people like yourself and others on this network where they refuse to allow the sane washing to continue. They fight it at every turn. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to turn around and to convince the MAGA supporters. Then they're irrelevant. They're in the camp. They're in the dumpster cult of Donald Trump, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter how much legitimate proof evidence that you provide, they don't believe it. They need to sane wash him. But that doesn't mean that there's not enough independents,
Sure.
Individuals who have not yet committed to one or the other.
Yeah.
Those are the people.
81 million people voted for Joe Biden the last election. 74 million voted for Donald Trump. 80 million people didn't vote.
Right.
Who could have voted. So
Correct.
The point is there's lots of space for people to be convinced of something without having to worry about those people who will never listen to a bad word about Donald Trump.
Correct. And the sane washing has to come to an end. Let Donald Trump tell you
What he means.
what he means. Let him tell you who he is. He has already made it crystal clear when he talks about, for example, rewriting the Constitution, when he talks about being able to destroy our tripartite system of government, to get rid of the executive branch. Hey, Supreme Court, understand, this is to you. He's going to get rid of you as well. When he talks about getting rid of the legislative branch and conferring all power to the executive branch, namely himself, making him into a king.
He keeps denying that he's got anything to do with this. This stuff's all written by his people.
By all of his people. I think only 2 chapters in
Are
the
not
whole
written
thing
by
are not
people
written by
connected.
people connected to him. It is, again, another lie by Donald Trump to the American people in order to, for whatever the reason may be, to BS them. Turn around. If you wrote this manifesto for the destruction of America's democracy, own it.
Yeah.
Take it.
Yeah.
But he refuses to do that only because, for one reason, it was not being well received. If that manifesto was well received,
he'd be
the
all
first one
over it.
all over, turning around saying,
But we
hey,
can both guarantee he hasn't read it. 922 pages.
I don't think he read page number 1.
Yeah. He's heard there's some unpopular stuff in here, so he's not talking about it. He's got a concept.
He has a concept of it.
Nice to see you, brother. Thank you. Michael Cohen, former personal attorney to Donald Trump, host of the Mea Culpa with Michael Cohen and the Political Beatdown podcasts, and host of the Michael Cohen Show on YouTube.